Have you ever met someone who changed your life in just one glance? A person so unexpected, so disarmingly pure, that they cracked open the walls you spent years building? That's exactly what happened to the most powerful CEO in the city. A man who trusted no one, who ruled his empire with an iron fist, until she walked in. A temporary secretary. A girl with no agenda, no hidden motives, just a heart too innocent for his world of cutthroat deals and cold calculations. But here's the mystery. Why did he, a man who never blinked at firing people, suddenly freeze when she handed in her resignation? Why did the sight of her tears make him do the one thing he swore he'd never do? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll uncover the shocking truth behind why this CEO, who vowed never to love again, risked everything for her. Asterisk. Let's be real. You clicked on this video because you've felt this before. That magnetic pull toward a story where opposites collide, where hardness meets softness, where power bends for vulnerability. Maybe you've been the CEO in your own life. Guarded, controlled, convinced you don't need anyone. Or maybe you've been the secretary, overlooked, underestimated, but with a quiet strength that shakes the wrong person at the right time. That's why this story isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about the walls we build, the chances we don't take, and the moments that force us to choose. Stay safe in our armor? Or let someone in, even if it destroys us. Now, I know what you're thinking. Asterisk, another cliché CEO romance? Hard pass. Asterisk, but here's the twist. What if I told you this isn't just a love story? What if I told you there's a secret buried in this CEO's past? A reason he's so ruthless, a trauma he's hidden for years. And what if this secretary, this nobody in his eyes, is the only one who can uncover it? That's the real mystery here. That's the answer you're staying to get. Because you need to know. How does someone so innocent bring a man like him to his knees? Meet Daniel Carter, billionaire, genius, and a man so closed off his own board calls him the Ice King. He doesn't do attachments. He doesn't do feelings. His last secretary lasted 3 days. Enter Layla Bennett, a small-town girl with a heart too big for the city, taking the job as a temp because she needs the money. She's not impressed by his wealth. She's not afraid of his temper. And that's his first mistake. Because when a man like Daniel can't intimidate someone like Layla, the only thing left to do is notice her. And once he does, there's no going back. But here's where it gets dangerous. Layla doesn't know it yet, but she's standing in the middle of a war. One Daniel's been fighting in the shadows for years. And when she accidentally stumbles upon the one thing he's killed to keep hidden, everything changes. The resignation letter? The tears? That was just the beginning. Because what happens next is something neither of them saw coming. Daniel Carter didn't become the most feared CEO in the city by accident. His empire was built on a foundation of ruthless decisions, late-night takeovers, and a reputation for crushing anyone who stood in his way. But what no one knew, what even his closest advisors never guessed, was that his ice-cold demeanor wasn't just strategy. It was survival. Years ago, long before the skyscrapers and boardroom battles, there was a betrayal so deep it scarred him in ways money could never fix. His father's business partner, a man he'd called uncle, had orchestrated the collapse of his family's fortune, leaving Daniel with nothing but a burning need to never be vulnerable again. That's why Layla Bennett was supposed to be insignificant. Just another name on a temp agency's roster, another face in the revolving door of his office. But from the moment she walked in, balancing a shaky tray of coffee and flashing an apologetic smile after spilling it on his $1,000 rug, something inside him flickered. It wasn't just her clumsiness or the way her cheeks flushed when she stammered an apology. It was the way she looked at him, not with fear or sycophantic admiration, but with something far more dangerous. Genuine kindness. Layla, for her part, had no illusions about who Daniel Carter was. She'd heard the stories, how he'd fired an entire department without blinking, how he'd dismantled companies before breakfast. But she needed this job. Her younger brother's medical bills were piling up, and the temp agency had promised her this assignment would last at least 3 months. She wasn't there to impress anyone, least of all a man who clearly thought the world owed him something. But as the days passed, she noticed things no one else seemed to. The way Daniel's grip tightened around his pen when his father's name was mentioned in meetings. The late nights he spent alone in his office, staring at a faded photograph he kept locked in his desk. And then there was the way he'd snap at anyone who interrupted him. Except her. The first time she'd brought him coffee without being asked, He'd glared at her like she'd committed a crime. But the next day, when she didn't, he'd gruffly asked where it was. It was a small thing, but it was the first crack in the armor he wore so well. Meanwhile, the city's elite were whispering. Daniel's sudden tolerance for a low-level secretary was raising eyebrows, especially among those who knew his history. His ex-fiancée Victoria, now a high-powered attorney with a grudge, had caught wind of Layla's presence and wasn't pleased. She'd been the one to walk away years ago, but seeing Daniel soften, even slightly, for someone else ignited a jealousy she couldn't suppress. Then there was Marcus, Daniel's right-hand man and the only person who knew the full truth about the betrayal that had shaped him. Marcus had always been loyal, but loyalty had limits. And when Layla accidentally overheard a phone call about a deal involving the same man who destroyed Daniel's family, Marcus's warning to Daniel was clear. Asterisk, she's a liability. Asterisk. But Daniel wasn't listening. Not after the night Layla stayed late to reorganize files and found him slumped over his desk, exhausted. She draped his coat over his shoulders, and when he jolted awake, their faces had been inches apart. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he'd done something unimaginable. He'd thanked her. Not with his usual curt nod, but with words. Real ones. That moment should have been the beginning of something. Instead, it was the calm before the storm. Because the next morning, Layla's resignation letter landed on his desk. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she'd been warned to. A mysterious note had been slipped into her bag. Asterisk, quit now, or everyone finds out what your brother did. Asterisk, she had no idea what it meant, but the threat was enough. What she didn't know was that Daniel had seen the fear in her eyes that morning. And for the first time in a decade, the Ice King felt something hotter than rage, the need to protect someone other than himself. But the game was already in motion. As Layla packed her desk, Daniel's enemies were closing in. The photograph in his drawer? It wasn't just a memory. It was evidence. And Layla, with her innocent questions and relentless sincerity, had gotten too close to the truth. Now the man who never let anyone in had a choice. Let her walk away and keep his empire intact, or dig into the shadows of her sudden resignation and risk everything. The problem? He'd already made his decision. The second her elevator doors closed, he was on the phone, demanding answers. Because no one threatened what was his. And whether he wanted to admit it or not, Layla Bennett wasn't just his secretary anymore. She was the one person who'd made him feel human again, and that made her dangerous. To his enemies. To his empire. And most of all to himself. The moment Layla stepped out of the elevator and into the pouring rain, she knew something was wrong. The anonymous note had mentioned her brother, but Jake had been clean for years, hadn't he? Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, dialing his number for the third time that hour, only to be met with silence. It wasn't like him to ignore her calls, especially not when she'd texted that she was in trouble. Across town, Daniel's private investigator was already digging, but what he uncovered wasn't just a threat, it was a trap. The blackmail note hadn't come from some random enemy. It had been sent by someone who knew exactly how to hurt Daniel where it mattered most. The same man who had destroyed his family all those years ago, Richard Vale, had resurfaced, and he wasn't just after Daniel's empire this time. He was after the one thing Daniel had sworn never to care about again. Someone he loved. Layla had no idea she was being watched as she rushed to her brother's apartment, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What she found there turned her blood to ice. The place had been ransacked, Jake's belongings strewn across the floor, and a single business card left deliberately on the kitchen counter. Richard Vale's name embossed in gold. Her breath caught. She'd heard that name before, muttered in hushed tones during late-night meetings in Daniel's office. But before she could process what it meant, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, you should have quit when you had the chance. Asterisk attached was a photo of Jake, bound and gagged in the back of a car, his terrified eyes staring straight into the camera. The world tilted around her. This wasn't just about her job anymore. This was about survival. Daniel's penthouse was in chaos by the time Marcus delivered the news. Richard had taken Layla's brother, and Layla herself had vanished. The security footage from her apartment building showed her getting into a cab, but the trail went cold after that. For the first time in his life, Daniel's carefully constructed control shattered. He'd spent years building walls to keep the world out, but Layla had slipped through without even trying, and now she was in danger because of him. The worst part? Richard wasn't just doing this for money or power. This was personal. Years ago, Daniel's father had exposed Richard's embezzlement, and Richard had vowed revenge. He'd waited, biding his time, until he found the perfect leverage: Daniel's weakness. And Layla, with her stubborn kindness and relentless loyalty, had become that weakness without either of them realizing it. Meanwhile, Victoria was playing her own game. She'd caught wind of Richard's return and saw an opportunity to finally take what she'd always wanted: Daniel's company. She reached out to him with an offer. Give me controlling shares, and I'll help you find her. But Daniel knew better than to trust her. Victoria had always been ruthless, but this was a new low. What she didn't know was that Layla wasn't as helpless as she seemed. Trapped in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, with Jake unconscious beside her, Layla had overheard Richard's plans. He wasn't just holding them for ransom. He was using them as bait to lure Daniel into a trap that would end with a bullet. And if there was one thing Layla refused to do, it was let Daniel walk into that alone. As night fell, Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring at the city lights. Marcus had handed him a file: Richard's suspected location, security blueprints, a list of known associates. Every logical part of him knew this was suicide. But logic had nothing to do with the storm raging inside him. Somewhere out there, Layla was in danger because of him, and that was unacceptable. He reached into his desk drawer, past the photograph of his father, and pulled out the one thing he'd sworn never to use again: a gun. The Ice King was done playing by the rules. Richard had made one fatal mistake. He'd underestimated how far Daniel would go for someone he loved. But what Daniel didn't know was that Layla had already escaped. In the chaos of a guard shift change, she'd grabbed Jake and run, stumbling through the darkened streets with no idea where to go. Her phone was dead, her brother was barely conscious, and the only person she could think of was the one man she'd tried to leave behind: Daniel. She didn't know if he'd help her. She didn't even know if he cared. But as the sound of approaching cars echoed behind her, she realized something terrifying. She was out of options. With the last of her strength, she dragged Jake into an alley and whispered the only thing that made sense anymore: Daniel, I need you. And miles away, as if he'd heard her, Daniel's phone lit up with an alert. The tracker he'd secretly placed in Layla's watch, the one she never knew about, had just activated. His breath stopped. She was alive. And she was running. The game had changed. Now it was a race against time, and the stakes were higher than ever. Because Richard wasn't the only one hunting her. Victoria had her own plans, and she just hired a team to make sure Layla never made it back to Daniel alive. The car screeched to a halt at an abandoned warehouse, its rusted doors groaning as the man, Daniel's oldest enemy, dragged Layla inside. Her wrists burned from the ropes, but the real pain was the crushing realization that she'd been used as bait in a decades-old vendetta. The man smirked as he forced her into a chair, his voice dripping with venom. Daniel will come for you, he said, and when he does, he'll sign over his empire just to keep you alive. Poetic, isn't it? His father chose pride over family too. Layla's mind raced. She had no weapons, no way out, but she had one advantage the man hadn't counted on. She knew Daniel better than he thought. And she knew he'd never walk into this blindly. Daniel burst through the warehouse doors exactly 59 minutes later, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up to reveal the jagged scar on his forearm, the one he'd gotten the night his father died. His eyes locked onto Layla, relief flashing for just a second before his gaze hardened at the man holding a gun to her head. Let her go, Daniel growled, tossing a folder onto the ground. The shares are yours. But touch her again, and I'll make sure you never spend a cent of it. The man laughed, kicking the folder open, only to freeze when he saw it wasn't a contract. It was evidence. Bank records, surveillance photos, proof that he'd embezzled millions from his own clients. Daniel took a step closer, his voice lethally calm. You underestimated me. Again. I've known you were behind this for weeks. Did you really think I wouldn't track every move you made after you threatened her? Then came the twist no one saw coming. Layla, still tied to the chair, let out a shaky breath. Daniel, the gun isn't loaded, she whispered. I checked when he wasn't looking. The man whirled around, pulling the trigger. Click. Daniel was on him in an instant, knocking the gun away as security teams swarmed the warehouse. But the real victory wasn't the arrest or the reclaimed shares. It was what happened after. As the police led the man away, Daniel dropped to his knees in front of Layla, his hands trembling as he untied her. I thought I'd lost you, he admitted, voice raw. And I realized. I can't lose you. Not ever. Layla cupped his face, her thumbs brushing away the rain, or were those tears streaking his cheeks? You won't, she said softly. But you're gonna have to explain why you have a secret security team tracking your employees. 3 months later, the headlines told a different story. Ice King CEO melts. Daniel Carter steps down to launch foundation with mystery fiancé. The press speculated endlessly about the woman who'd tamed the untamable, but only a few knew the truth. Layla hadn't tamed him. She'd simply shown him he was still human. As for the brothers' medical debt, paid in full, not by Daniel, but by Layla, using the salary she'd earned fair and square. Because some things, she'd insisted, had to stay hers. The final twist? That photograph from Daniel's desk? Layla had found the original, hidden in the enemy's pocket the night of the confrontation. It wasn't just a picture of betrayal. On the back, in faded ink, were his father's last words. Sometimes the greatest strength is letting someone in. And as Daniel slipped the ring onto Layla's finger under the stars, the same ones they'd argued beneath the night they met, he finally understood what those words meant.